Welcome to the Write Your Own Story podcast. I'm your host, Betsy Leonidas, and the founder of the Write Your Own Story company. Girl, I can tell you right now, you are definitely enough. Here we value service, sisterhood, connection, laughter, and that super genuine, keep it real, tell you like it is honesty. My hope is at the end of each episode, you realize you can do whatever it is you dream about and that you are not alone with what you struggle with. I'm hoping that you are snapping and clapping and hell yes in your way through each one of these episodes. So if this tracks with you, let's get started. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome everyone back to the latest episode of the Write Your Own Story podcast. I'm your host, Betsy Leonidas, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Ashley Solomon from Galia Collaborative.
Hi, I'm so delighted to be here with you too.
Oh, I have done a horrible job of keeping us on time because you were just such a treat to talk to that we were talking off camera. And I was like, oh God, look what I've done. I've run into all of our recording time, but it's just been so lovely to sit with you and have a cup of coffee. I'm so excited for people to hear this conversation.
Oh, thank you. It's been really fun. We already need a part two.
Right. We absolutely need a part two. And I was saying we're going to bust open the mini fridge of wine for part two.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to start with our bio and then I'm going to bump us into what our intention is and then just dive right into these questions because I really do want to be mindful of your precious time. Okay. So today's guest is Dr. Ashley Solomon, a clinical psychologist, recovering perfectionist, snaps for that, and founder of Galia Collaborative, an organization on a mission to help women heal, thrive, and lead. Ashley has spent over a decade treating eating disorders and supporting women through their complex layers of perfectionism, burnout, and self-doubt. She's someone who has always challenged status quo, starting with writing letters about gender bias as a second grader. I love that so much. And now leads a team of mental health professionals dedicated to changing the narrative around women's mental health. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation today. And with you, I mean, gosh, I feel like we could cover a myriad of topics around women and all the things that we want to rewrite the narrative about. But what I asked you to come on the show for today, part one, is really around supporting women to feel seen and really just to have a judgment-free conversation around disordered eating. I want people to feel understood and seen and supported. And I think, as we were saying before we started rolling, that I am feeling the pressure of skinny culture coming back just as a study of one human woman, with in truly no judgment for anyone who participates, but with Ozempic and of the like. And just, I feel like the conversation is like, ooh, she got skinny and like, and it is hard as someone who doesn't participate and always wants to look a little leaner, stronger, and fitter, just as a woman in the societal pressures that we have. And I hold a huge piece of sympathy in my heart for those who struggle with disordered eating and to have society to put this sort of magnified lens on skinny culture again. And so I was like, you know what, let's talk about it. So truly here to serve and I am, incredibly curious. I'm just a curious cat. So I've always got like 1,000 questions, which is why I love this show. But so that is the intention for today.
Yeah, I love it. I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it's something that is really, as you said, rising in the culture and deserves some conversation.
Yeah. I have goosebumps. Thank you for saying that. I love that. Okay. So I kind of like broke this into sections. So what I wanted to start was really some sort of foundational elements. Okay. How do disordered eating patterns typically develop? I mean, like, where does this even start in women or girls, especially given culture?
So I'm going to start by kind of giving you a model.
Yes, please. Take it any direction you want to go.
Yeah. So in psychology and in mental health, we talk a lot about what's called the biopsychosocial model, which a lot of people have probably heard that term, but it really breaks down to thinking about disorders and how they come to be as a function of our biology, our psychology, and our social systems and the environment. And I really think in a lot of ways, eating disorders do a great job of sort of demonstrating how that model works.
The trifecta.
Because they really are sort of a culmination of factors and they cannot be sort of isolated to any one factor. So just sort of starting from the biology. Well, actually, let me say something else first, which is that for a lot of years before as a science or culture, we started to really invest in understanding the biological bases of mental health conditions. There was a ton of emphasis with disordered eating and eating disorders on more of those sort of social factors, but really parenting. And so the unfortunate thing is that for, several decades, there was an overemphasis on kind of the influence of parenting, and specifically mothers. And that's been true throughout the kind of history of mental health, that moms have been sort of blamed for all kinds of mental health experiences. And that's certainly not to say that moms don't have a lot of influence and can have a deep impact, positively or negatively. But there was a lot of emphasis on the role of moms. And then we sort of shifted in, the 90s and the early 2000s into trying to look at biological bases of mental health conditions. So, not just eating disorders, depression, anxiety, et cetera. And what is interesting to note is that despite the fact that we spent quite a lot of years looking for like a gene or some kind of genetic signature or biological basis for disordered eating, for eating disorders, and like I said, even for depression, we haven't been able to find that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I actually think that's kind of a misconception. I think a lot of, because we talk so much about, these disorders being biologically rooted, I think a lot of people assume that we have more evidence, more sort of concrete things to point to than we actually do. So it doesn't mean that there's not a biological element. And I say all this is a very long-winded answer.
I love long-winded answers.
Okay.
Just to be clear, this is a very safe place. I love long-winded answers. I also love tangents. I also love forgetting what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. We're going to be a really good match then.
Absolutely. This is just those are the safest little green couch. Yeah.
All my favorite things.
Yes, absolutely. Every time.
So we don't have, we can't point to, with eating disorders, a specific gene or, a specific sort of brain area that we say, oh, that's the cause.
So then there would be the fix, right?
Right.
So it's more complex.
I mean, that would be lovely in many ways. Yeah. We could say, okay, let's go in and fix this.
Right. Here's a pill. Here's some
kind of intervention.
Yep.
What we do think is the case on the biological side of things is that there are likely kind of a constellation of genes that, when they work together, increase the risk. So you can see there's a lot of sort of layers there to that. It's not a direct line, but we do think there are certainly genetic and heritable, things that we pass down that contribute to how at risk one person is versus another person to kind of these experiences and behaviors. So without that, concrete one gene that we can point to, then we start to get curious about, okay, if we do know at least that some people are at higher risk, like what is that risk? And this is what I think is probably most important about what I'm saying, is that what we find, this is actually true across mental health conditions, not just eating disorders, is that people who tend to develop mental health conditions start out with a sort of higher degree of reactivity and sensitivity. So we can think about that. And that is biologically based. That baby is born and they are just more reactive to their environment. They might be a little harder to calm down. Like, for those of us who have multiple children,
I was just going to say,
we know there are big differences.
Yes, truly.
From day one,
and all grown from the same place.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, how did you, wind up so different?
Yes.
And so we call that temperament, which is, that has a lot to do with like, how easy is this child to soothe? What is their sort of sensitivity to their environment around them? And so for people with eating disorders, but people with all mental health conditions really, or many, we start out with that higher degree of reactivity. And so what happens often with eating disorders and how we actually see it develop from just this kind of, vulnerability into an actual disorder is that at some point and across, time, and sometimes that's very young and sometimes it's not until later, we realize that eating disorder behaviors, so that might be limiting how much we eat, eating a lot to the point of overfullness, purging even, engaging in any of those behaviors seems to just sort of quiet the noise of that sensitivity. It turns down the sensitivity a little bit. So it kind of takes us out of our experience, whether that's because it's like distracting us, but really it's also because of the way that it's impacting our neurotransmitters or brain chemicals. It just sort of calms us. For people who are at risk and have that genetic constellation, it like turns down the noise. For other people, if they go, a long time without eating, they are going to feel really agitated.
Right. The noise goes way up.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But but it sort of has a soothing effect.
And okay, so when I mean, anyone can think about, I think anyone has experienced some form of anxiety or discomfort,
sure.
and to just have something that turns down the noise,
Right.
I can imagine how tempting that is.
Gives that relief.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That makes me so.
And it's often not like we're not necessarily even conscious of it. Like when we start to do, so sometimes that develops, when we're very young, certainly before we have any kind of conscious correlation where we're saying like, oh, okay, if I do this, it's like, I notice but they just, what people will describe, especially when it starts young, is that I just feel like I can focus better, or I can, get through the day better, or, my thoughts aren't as distracting to me, or I feel more in control, or I feel more empowered. And then you're layering on. So we talked about the biological, sort of the psychological, and then you layer on the social piece, which is that we're getting so much reinforcement, and everyone's saying, whether, oh, you look so great because you've, your weight has changed, or just sort of the social reinforcement of, you eat so healthy, or, people feeling impressed that you're eating little, and that's where we kind of layer in that gender socialization, and why we see these disorders so much more prevalent among women, although they absolutely occur across all genders, and boys and men for sure. But there are those differences, obviously, in socialization and what kind of reinforcement we're getting and what the expectations are and that sort of thing. And so that's where we kind of get that trifecta model and all those things kind of coming together.
It that reinforcement from the social aspect and sort of the relief, whether they can consciously or not consciously sense, it has to just lock that in.
Yeah.
That has got, and what a immense challenge to be able to be like, wait, this is something that actually makes me, like, quote unquote, feel better, or receive feedback that is positive, and to let go of that. And okay, so what I had always sort of, this is probably too generalized, but one of the perceptions that I had about it was that it was almost a form of, these are probably too harsh of words, so everyone take this with a grain of salt, but like punishment by discipline, where it was like, or this like grasp for control, where something feels out of control, or you're like, you know what, if I just worked harder at this, I will be worthy, or, just like sort of where what you're saying is very much on the other side of it, to be like, no, this is soothing. This is comforting. This turns down noise. This feels.
I would say that I think what you're describing sort of fits within this model as well. Honestly, I think that even taking the, the term of punishment, which I think a lot of people with eating disorders would resonate for them.
Really?
For sure. And so, and I think, we see this also correlated with other forms of self-harm, or directly or indirectly,
or like obsessive thoughts, or like,
right. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that sort of like self-punishing, or feeling that it feels very connected to that sense of, a lack of worthiness, or like an undeservedness. Like, I think that certainly resonates for a lot of people. I think that sort of fits within this model, that it's because of those sort of functions, or because of the way that I start to feel about myself, that I'm sort of looking for that soothing in different ways. Like, I feel like if I can do that, okay, it turns down that voice in my head that's like, okay, you're not good enough. You haven't done this. You need to get on this, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, I think, has to do with that sort of like ruminative, obsessive voice that plays.
Yes. And that was kind of new news to me, but in research for the show, I was listening to a separate podcast that was around myths around eating disorders. And a lot of it was around the voice in the head. And I don't know, it was just incredibly interesting, and just, again, unlocked a whole new layer of empathy. One thing before I get in, because I wanted to ask you specifically about myths, but one thing that, out of my own curiosity, when you said that these younger guys and girls that are more reactive, is there a difference between reactivity and sensitivity? I might be splitting hairs, but like, when you say reactivity, is it like the big sort of, you know what I mean? Versus sensitivity is like sort of you embody it, or I don't know.
No, that's a good question. I'm using those terms interchangeably, I think, in how I'm describing that. And when I say reactivity, I'm thinking about like the degree to which I react to my environment, not necessarily what would be seen. Like my reactions are big.
I see.
Because actually a lot of, people that particularly that struggle with eating disorders and a lot of women and girls, and again, because of the way that we're socialized, don't have particularly big sort of reactions, or people may be very surprised to know that they like feel as deeply or as strongly about the things that they feel. And, we call that just being internalized.
Yes.
And so, this is to overly stereotype. We think about like internalizing behaviors and externalizing behaviors. And the stereotyping part is that we tend to see more internalizing behaviors among girls and externalizing behaviors among boys. And yet what's underneath all of that is really the same, however it's being manifested. And certainly there, could be of the other gender,
absolutely,
or any gender, and be more of an internalizer, externalizer. But it really often relates to just like how deeply I feel things.
That makes total sense.
And I will just to point out when I say how deeply I feel things, I mean, certainly emotionally, but also even just like sensorily. So how sensitive I am to sounds and noises and environments or shifts or changes, or how reactive I might be to when my routine has to change, and how much do I thrive on consistency versus like, no, I'm really flexible. Whatever happens, happens. So that's what I mean by sensitivity. Not just, I think we think more about the like emotional sensitivity.
Totally.
It's all of it.
Okay. That's so helpful to clarify. Cause I was thinking about it. I mean, you can't help but reflect on your own children or the people in your lives. And you're like trying to sort of be like, okay, what would be an example of that? But that makes total sense that reactivity and sensitivity is both like an internal and an external, and is so multifaceted versus just like emotions and big feelings and reactions.
Right.
That makes, it's like, okay, that makes,
and that's sort of
sense.
The pathway to, and I know I said this, but a lot of mental health conditions, we're, talking in particular about eating disorders, but when you're starting out with that, higher reactivity, sensitivity, you're going to be so much more vulnerable to could be using substances or to more aggressive behaviors or whatever. Like you can sort of see that is often the root of, different pathways that then we end up labeling as kind of different mental health conditions, but often really share kind of a similar root foundation.
Yeah. It's fascinating, but it genuinely makes sense. And I could ask a million questions as why people choose which path, but okay. Staying on the path of eating disorders, what are some of the myths that are like floating around?
Yeah.
What are people getting wrong?
I'm going to name a couple, I feel like obvious ones,
but but
in some ways I think that despite the fact that they might be, should be obvious as myths, they continue to kind of be pervasive in our culture. And one is just this kind of stereotype that eating disorders are kind of relegated to adolescent girls and that population. And I think what what reality tells us is that, they certainly can develop at any point in someone's life. We do tend to see those risk factors start to emerge kind of earlier, but it's been interesting for me to work with people kind of across the lifespan. And there are definitely certain points, beyond adolescence or teenagehood that we see this higher risk of the incident. So really kind of any big life transition, anytime, when you start to think about the big life transitions of also, potentially having babies or a midlife kind of menopause transition, those tend to be higher risk times for the development of disordered eating. And of course, it's, again, that biopsychosocial, biologically, our bodies are changing, things are feeling maybe more out of control, hormonal fluctuations, all of that.
Lord help us all.
But then there's identity changes. And meanwhile, our social lives are changing and the structure of like our families. So I guess to go back, that eating disorders certainly occur kind of across the lifespan. Certainly, like we said before, don't solely happen in women or girls.
Yes.
And more attention is being paid to kind of male experiences of eating disorders, which is great.
Yes.
And then I think another one in terms of a myth is that, honestly, this feels like a myth to me, but I'm curious, maybe people don't think this, but I think that for a long time, when we talked about recovery from eating disorders, there was this kind of similar to oftentimes how we talk about substance abuse challenges, that there's an assumption that if you have an eating disorder, even if you sort of recover from it, that it's something that you will always sort of struggle with, or that you will always sort of have to kind of keep it at bay.
Really?
And I actually think that that's somewhat of a myth, that I feel that true recovery is actually very possible, and that there are plenty of people who may have struggled at some point in time and it really doesn't feel part of their life at all. It's not something that they have to, in a super conscious way, at least, attend to. They might, need to be aware that certain things, like if we get into the, Ozempic conversation, they're going to be a different kind of vulnerability to those things. But just, I feel like there's not enough of an emphasis that like true recovery is possible and sort of long-term recovery is possible.
That's so motivating. And like, I think for anyone who has suffered and maybe isn't seeking help, or is in the beginning parts of seeking help, or just in the messy middle, when you're just like, good God, I'm trying.
Right.
And like I think that that's so encouraging to know that like this can truly pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
Okay, can we have the Ozempic conversation a little bit?
Sure.
And I really like, again, this is a judgment-free, safe space. If people are using it, that is a whole separate conversation. Mm-hmm. This is I just want to focus on, with it being so prevalent in our culture, and surfacing sort of the skinny conversation again to be louder, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What effect do you think that has on society as a whole relative to disordered eating?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly feels like, I think you're naming this. It feels to me like the pendulum is swinging back. Like we had this period of time in which we really, were in this era of body positivity and maybe body neutrality and body liberation, are some of the terms that I would often use. And that felt great. Wonderful.
Oh, I miss it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Remember those days?
Remember? I think I do.
Yeah. And so, and it definitely feels like the pendulum is swinging back. And, I've reflected a lot on this, maybe obviously. And, and I think that is, even outside of this specific, example, that is what happens in cultural movements, that we see that sort of pendulum swing, and we're seeing that in other ways in our society too. But I think I think that has been influenced certainly by these GLP-1s and Ozempic as an example. But I do have to wonder, like, sort of chicken or egg, in some ways I think we're primed for this like pendulum swing back.
Yeah.
And then, sort of corresponding with that, we're seeing these medications getting this more widespread use. And I think, to the kind of question about what the impact then on the larger culture, I mean, I'm glad that you're kind of making that distinction, because I really think about it, this is such a nuanced conversation. There's incredibly so many layers to it.
So much sensitivity to be had.
Yeah.
But it's something we should talk about.
Yeah. And so I think what we're speaking maybe more to, or going to be getting into, is sort of the kind of collective experience versus the individual experience. Because I think the individual experience of deciding whether this medication is right for you, whether it fits, for your history and goals and those sorts of things, like that's particularly nuanced and
only your business.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And very rarely, and I have, plenty of colleagues and personally in the eating disorder world who would very much disagree with me and say, have much stronger sort of feelings against any use of these medications. And for me personally, I think, and I've been in that sort of mindset at various points and my own evolution.
Same. Absolutely.
With different things. And I think, the older I get, or hopefully wiser I get, I think that I'm just like here for the nuance of it all, and just that sort of, I don't know, I think of it as like curiosity and humility about like, you know, if someone talks to me about wanting to try these medicines, like I want to hear about what that means for them and what, you know, what's part of that kind of decision process for them. And let's talk about it. I think at the cultural level, I think that it gets, you know, I'm thinking about all the, you know, work that so many people in our generation have done in terms of body positivity and those sorts of things. And I think it just gets really confusing. It gets confusing, I think, I'm thinking about for younger people in particular who are experiencing this world in which on the one hand, they're hearing these messages of, you know, you can, you know, your body is perfect just the way that it is. And, you know, you need to be, you can be proud of it at any size. And then, you know, they might be looking around at adults around them with bodies that are just shrinking and shrinking. And I think to what you're saying, and many people that just aren't talking about it, we're not talking about it, having that cultural conversation.
Yeah.
And again, it's tricky because it's not like we all need to go around wearing signs that like, this is what I'm choosing to do with my body. And at the same time, I do think about the impact on kind of the larger culture and particularly, you know, younger people who are trying to make sense of like, well, do they really mean that? And that's okay for me, but not for them. And, you know, they're not privy to the conversation that person's having with their doctor about, you know, what their A1C levels are like, and
what their weight loss journey goals are and why, et cetera.
Right.
I totally agree. That is incredibly nuanced. And I do think, to see these girls watch these adult women who were in all shapes and sizes, kind of, this is such a generalization. So please just everyone ride the generalization train with me. But like, you know, to see everyone kind of shrinking, it's got to be like, is that what I'm supposed to do? I don't know. But what does it feel like for someone who has recovered from an eating disorder and is like, I am body positive, to then be like, well, yeah, I'm body positive, but I also wish I was like 7 pounds lighter, but I do love my body. And now there's, you know, this option. Is that hard?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really hard. I mean, I'm having, certainly myself and my colleagues are having these conversations like literally every day with people, you know, both with people who are still struggling with eating disorders and then maybe seeing these medications as, you know, something that feels appealing to, you know, quote unquote, like quickly address the weight loss that they're hoping for, as well as people who are like many, many years out from struggling in that way, but noticing, you know, a pull towards using these medicines for all sorts of reasons. But I do think it's really, again, I mean, I don't mean to just keep repeating myself about the nuance part, but it's so nuanced in terms of like, you know, I don't think that it's a process of kind of landing on one, like one perspective on it, even within any individual person. You know, I think we're full of, contain multitudes is one of my favorite, you know, things to say. Like there's going to be parts of us. I often talk in language of the different parts of us to kind of acknowledge that there's going to be a part of us who continues maybe even in very solid recovery to observe the way in which someone at a lower weight is treated differently in our society. That is factual.
Yes. With all the, like the reinforcement that you were talking about at the top of the show, to be like, wow, you look amazing.
Yeah. Even unconsciously on the part of other people at times, which, you know, we all need to do our work to make that more conscious. But, you know, so there's a part of us that will look at that and see like, I want that. Like, I want to be treated better.
Yes.
You know,
that's human nature.
Absolutely. And then there might be a part that says like, and I know that tends to lead me down a path of like obsessionality because then that puts more focus for me. And there might be a part that maybe as a parent and, you know, thinking about like, I wonder what the implications might be for, you know, my children. Then there's a part that's, you know, well, could this be good for my health? So that's why it becomes so complicated, because I do think we need to lay out at the individual level. I think being able to have those conversations and sort of like parse the different pieces is really helpful. And that can be with a therapist or ideally somebody that, you know, you knows your history and you kind of get into the nuance with. I don't think those are not the conversations though that are typically happening with people's primary care doctors or the people who are prescribing the medicines. And that's what concerns me to some degree is that, it's not easy it's fairly easy at this point to get prescribed these medicines. Now there's a huge cost to them, and it's so they're hard to access. But it's fairly easy to get a prescription. And so that's the part that, just concerns me as a citizen or as a psychologist, is that, I don't know how well we are doing at having nuanced conversations with people about, their interests, but also even just like the side effects and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I think for a lot of people that I talk to, that's really been glossed over. And so my priority is I just want everybody to have informed consent, to sort of have a chance to fully flesh out their own complicated thoughts and feelings about it for themselves, and then to kind of know what to expect and know how to get support and that kind of thing.
I love that. I love that so much. And then for someone who, has worked so hard to get to body positivity, or is working on body positivity, to just continue to focus, to keep your eyes on your own paper, which is probably it's something I tell myself all the time for all the millions of facets of life. I'm like, this is your life. Keep your eyes on your own paper kind of thing. But, in effort to support yourself and just to remember like where you are, the nuanced, all the nuanced pieces to your own journey. I feel like, I don't know. But
totally.
Hey, fellow boss babe, if you're craving less time on social because it feels like you're constantly in your comments and DMs trying to respond back to your potential customers, I totally get it. When I had my e-commerce business, I felt like I checked Instagram every 5 minutes. But what if there was a smarter, easier way to connect with your audience? Good news, there is. Let me introduce you to ManyChat, my go-to tool for automating messages on Instagram, Facebook, and even text. With ManyChat, you can set up automated conversations in minutes. No tech headaches, no coding required. Trust me, if I can figure it out, so can you. It's perfect for handling links to your offers, growing your list with DM keywords, and even booking clients literally while you sleep. It's efficient, super user-friendly, and honestly, it's like having a virtual assistant built right into your DMs. And the best part? Because you're a friend of the Write Your Own Story podcast, you can try it totally free for your first month. Just use the link in the show notes. Is there anything better than to test something for your business for an entire month with no cost attached? It's my favorite. So if you're ready to save time, respond faster, and turn followers into clients, tap the link in the show notes and give ManyChat a try for free. First month's on me. Grab the offer today and go enjoy a much needed break from your phone. You deserve it. But okay, so I kind of want to get into the emotional and sort of like psychological side of disordered eating. If we've talked about sort of like a sort of magical genetic predisposition, as well as just the tendency for reactivity and sensitivity. But like, what about the exposure to trauma or or maybe later in life, constant or chronic stress? Like, are these contributing factors? And how do those sort of layer in with like the people pleasing and perfectionist conversation? I'm sure every woman was just like turning it up. So I feel like we all absolutely struggle with this. And again, quite the layered conversation, endlessly layered. But as it relates to those, again, I think about those who are struggling out there, or think they like, oh, I wonder if I am a little disordered and how I'm doing this. Like, and if they could just feel seen a little bit around perfectionism and people pleasing and trauma and stress.
Well, that last point that you're making, I think, is such an important one, that I think that there's such a large sort of segment of people who may not even identify kind of their relationship with food as disordered, in part maybe because they, haven't been able or willing to kind of like really examine it, but also because it's often like disordered eating is actually very normalized in our culture.
Can you expand on that for just a sec?
Yeah.
Or as long as you want.
Sure.
I'll give you forever.
I mean, in many ways we prescribe disordered eating, we have physicians or, the medical community prescribing the very same behaviors that in an eating disorder treatment program, I spent decades, teaching people was eating disordered. What they're doing, in terms of like extended fasting and things like that. So, so the same behaviors are often like, praised and reinforced in our culture. And just,
and it's complicated because then, like, for example, fasting or focusing really on like high protein, high fat, low carb, like that is, from what I understand scientifically, it's to balance your blood sugar and to like, sort of help your digestion and all these things. But to your point, like the obsessive counting of macros and the extended periods of not eating are like probably what you're trying to unwind and untangle for so many of those who are challenged.
And that's where there's nothing that we can, at least the way that I look at it is that there's nothing that we can sort of fully assess or diagnose in isolation. We have to understand exactly to what you're saying, not just the behavior, but the sort of the cognitions, the feelings, the emotions around it, the intentions around it.
It's not a broken bone. Yeah.
Right. And so it's nuanced. Again,
I hope everyone has their bingo cards out because I can't stop saying it either.
Right. Yeah. So
nuanced.
So we, so it's so many of the sort of ways that we engage with food or think about food or even like taking it kind of in a different direction from actual behaviors, even just the way that we kind of normalize kind of calling foods like good or bad or junk food or this or that.
Yeah.
Sort of like couching the way that we talk about food often in like very moral terms or saying like, I was so good today. I didn't, those sorts of things. We may barely notice that we do them because they are so sort of, we've become so socialized to do many of them.
When you said moral terms, what a light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's okay, I'm going to send you some stuff
because
there's some really great, people who've written like quite extensively on the way that we moralize, our relationship with food. And it's been, and even the overlay of religion and things like that. And
this is a rabbit hole I definitely want to dive down. This brings me, like, my curiosity is like, here we go.
Yeah. And like, what does it mean to be a good girl or woman, or what does it mean to be,
it's going to be
purity and all of those things sort of start to layer in. And, as you're doing your own kind of internal work, you have to sort of tease apart, like just even noticing like, the way that I describe, how I feel about myself around food or, in my relationship with food, like where do I even see that other language coming out? It may be a good question to like notice or ask ourselves.
I love that. And so then when we think about this notion of like being a good girl or eating, I did great, I ate well today, or I did great today.
I was so bad.
I was so right. And all that. How does that connect to this perfection and people pleasing? And it kind of, is this like a chicken and egg situation? Is it like an enmeshment? I mean, how does this all, and for those who are struggling with disordered eating or thinking they might be, or know someone, like, how can we all just feel a little seen in that?
Yeah. So I think to get at that, I want to define, if you will, like sort of, or at least conceptualize how I think about perfectionism and people pleasing, which may be a little different or maybe not from how people tend to talk about it. But I think both perfection and people pleasing at the end of the day are an inability to kind of tolerate the feelings that come up in me when, either in the case of people pleasing, when you have your feelings, and whatever feelings those might be, or in the case of perfectionism, when things don't go as, expected or prescribed or aligned or whatever. And so, but really at the heart of that is a sort of intolerance or a difficulty with being able to like tolerate my own emotional experience. And so I think that we then, going back, to the very beginning of our conversation and thinking about, if I'm sort of chronically on edge because I have such a hard time tolerating how I feel when I know how you feel, or that I can't control how you feel, whatever, like I need something to sort of calm that down or soothe that, or to sort of stand in and tell me like, no, you're okay, you're good enough, or you've made a good choice today. And just so often like food is the stand-in for that, or our relationship to food becomes the stand-in for that, because I think in one way, because it's something we do hopefully many times a day,
right.
That we're kind of engaging with. And it's so much a part of, our experience that it's sort of an easy thing, if you will, to sort of start to almost misuse. And I misuse maybe both in the way that we are like actually eating or not eating or changing our eating habits, but also just misuse in terms of like giving it so much power.
Yeah.
Like ascribing it so much power for how I, end up feeling about myself for the rest of the night, or, those
or like
of things.
in a reward system kind of thing, to be like, oh, I've been, I've had a hard day, so I'm going to have a cookie and I'm going to feel so much better. I know it's just like the emotional connection to food.
Yeah.
That has to be endlessly layered.
Yeah.
And in society where we gather and we eat, and are you at the table? Are you not? Like, I mean, God almighty, there's a lot of layers to this.
And I don't think it's, I've actually moved away from the description of, or kind of using the term emotional eating, even though, and actually, because I actually think all eating is emotional to some degree.
That tracks. So, absolutely.
And usually what we're describing when we're talking about emotional eating is like, eating while I'm extremely emotionally distressed. And so I'm, sort of eating to soothe or numb.
To soothe,
whatever. But I think it's just really important to acknowledge that, just exactly what you're saying, that eating has such a, and food from literally day negative one, sort of inside our mother's womb, or, breastfeeding or taking milk or whatever, has this extreme emotional connection. It's releasing oxytocin. It's making us feel safe. It's making us feel satisfied. It's making us feel close. So, and that's actually a beautiful thing. So, the goal, of course, is not to, take all the emotion out of food. But it's also, there's a risk of sort of like over relying on it for comfort, or over relying on the absence of it for comfort, or whatever, sort of like, misusing how, what its potential is in terms of its kind of emotional valence for us.
That, I mean, this is endlessly fascinating. And then when I think about the concepts of like trauma or chronic stress, and referencing sort of the discomfort that sits inside, and our intolerance, or, as relative to scale of being able to sit in that discomfort. And then if you are constantly triggered or in chronic stress, with a life-changing event or whatever it may be. And with, like you're saying, food is just at the table, readily available to be some sort of comfort or soothe or whatever it may be. Is that how these are all so deeply connected?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways. I mean, I think in terms of trauma, like when we're talking about like early trauma, then kind of linking that to that model that we've been talking about today, where the trauma itself, so maybe that particular person maybe they were born with higher reactivity, or maybe they weren't, but then the trauma can add in this layer of heightened reactivity, heightened sensitivity.
Right. Because safety has been shook.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, I'm saying that early on, but at any point, really, we have, our brains, fortunately, in the grand scheme of things, are very malleable. So even if that occurs like later in life, but we've been really rocked by a trauma, then we're going to be oriented to trying to soothe ourselves, trying to find safety. And like you said, if we're repeatedly kind of encountering triggers and our nervous system feels just like constantly activated, then for some people, their relationship with food will be something that they turn to kind of regulate that. Not intentionally for the most part. They're not like, I'm going to start doing this. This will make me feel better. Right. Yeah. But it just sort of starts to happen. Honestly, it often starts to happen, which is why I'm so, what's the word? I don't know. I guess I'll say anti diet, is because what often starts to happen is that in the midst of maybe a life change or a transition or stress, someone will layer in, and now I'm going to go on a diet, or I'm going to change, or, and I feel like these days we don't talk about diets as much.
We don't,
like even that I'm realizing as I'm like saying that out loud, I'm like, we don't say that as much, but we'll just say like, I'm going to make this change to, or I'm going to try out this new lifestyle. I'm going to try
intermittent fasting.
Right. Yeah.
Which I literally just said. So I am, no one out there is alone.
But we'll try that. We'll sort of initiate, or we'll initiate some of those things maybe in the midst of like a particularly stressful period. And those things tend to correlate, not always. And what people will find, kind of going back to, again, that original model, is that, oh, and I feel calmer. Now I feel more empowered because I'm feeling like I'm having success in this. Whereas like in this, divorce that I'm going through, or this big career change or whatever, I feel like that's so uncertain. But this I can I can predict, and I can create a routine, and I have some agency over.
Yes.
Meanwhile, what might be happening is that some of those kind of behaviors or patterns are also kind of getting locked in into our brain wiring and how we're feeling. And then that's where, again, not everyone will become obsessional about it. I mean, it depends on how we're, more innately wired, but some people will become then more sort of quote unquote addicted, if you will, or obsessional, or it feels like, okay, but now I can't stop, because if I do, then I feel terrible.
Yeah.
And that's when that's when it becomes problematic. And that's where it becomes not just sort of like, oh, I did, intermittent fasting for a while. Like that was fine.
Yeah. I tried it. I think I have a healthy relationship. I genuinely felt better, or I felt like crap. So I stopped.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Oh, and I think that's such an important distinction. So I'm thinking about, and I'm also being mindful of time, because I got to get you out of here soon. But that when I think about like, okay, if someone is like, as we're talking, they're like, oh, this feels like kind of me-ish. And they're starting to be like, in a reflective place. Like, and we think about like, what are those flags? Red flags is such a sad term, but like, what are those flags? Be like, gosh, maybe I should consider help. It's like, is it sort of your emotional relationship with whatever it is that you're doing? And you're like, if you have gotten to an obsessive place, which, oh my God, I'm amazing at obsessing about things. So no judgment. That's my favorite sport.
Yes.
But maybe that is time, or like, what are some of the markers that if you're a person where you're like, I thought I was just being healthy, but like, you're raising things that feel true.
Yeah.
What are some markers where people might want to?
I think you kind of hit on a really good one, which is that, I just think, if I really get kind of honest with myself with like, what percentage of my day am I like thinking about food? Is I think a good question to ask ourselves, because I mean, it should be a, very tiny percentage,
breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right.
And snack.
Yeah. Like, oh, and, but if I find myself just like expending too much mental energy, even if it doesn't necessarily, I'm not, thinking about it as super distressing, but I'm just like spending more energy than I really want to, or time than I really want to be like thinking about that. Or it feels like, especially if it feels like I can't focus on the things that I want to focus on, because like, I'm starting to feel more obsessive. Or if the behaviors, like, we didn't get into this as much, but, sort of over exercise or compulsively feeling like I need, sorry,
that's okay.
Feeling like I need to move, and those sorts of things, like to the point where I can't be flexible. I think that that's always a really good sign. Like when, if something comes up and changes in my schedule, and maybe I'm not going to be able to, have the dinner I planned, or I'm not going to be able to
get the workout in,
right, whatever it might be, that the degree of distress that causes is often a really good sign of like, how much is this actually controlling my life? Because, hopefully we're just like, okay, I mean, that's a bummer, but
shoot, I had a goal and this is I'm off my plan, but
right. But for some of us, we're going to be like, really thinking about that a lot, or we're going to feel like I can't like, calm down, or I feel like I can't get to the rest of my day in the way that I want to, or whatever. So just the degree of flexibility, the degree of kind of time and energy we're spending. Certainly if like anyone in your life is mentioning that, they're concerned, or even just that they like notice, I think that we can understandably feel a little defensive around those things at times. But if we can really kind of keep an open heart and mind to, if someone's wondering something, that probably means something.
Something's up, and it's coming. And like, and I would imagine that if they finally said something that they've been ruminating on it for a while.
Because I don't think we say these things to each other very often.
No, especially in this space, right? I don't think so. Unless it's like
never, I don't want to offend. I mean, going back to the people pleasing, right? We're so afraid to upset anybody that, right? Which is unfortunate, because I wish that we had these conversations more candidly, including being able to say like, I noticed this, like, tell me a little bit about that. Like I was, feeling a little concerned, should I be that. Like, I think there's definitely ways to engage in these conversations that are very loving and
so gentle and genuine. Okay. What's not to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think anything in the realm of course, like accusation or even just like deciding that you know the sort of cause or background of a specific thing. So I mean, this is just sort of general, like people 101, but
yeah, sometimes we all need to be reminded though.
Yeah. It's just approaching everything with curiosity. There was, I like this little like phrasing, which I think is a good, like applicable to lots of different situations. Maybe even, I had never thought about this till right now, but maybe even like pointing things out to our kids, our teenagers or whatever, but which is I see, I fear, and I hope. So like I see that, or I know, notice might even be a better word. Like I notice that you aren't eating very much, and I fear that you might be struggling in this way. Like I hope that you would talk to me about it if that's, or, fill in the blank. But I think it's like a good little rubric for like bringing up in a gentle way a concern. And of course there might be times where, the hope is not like, I hope you talk to me, but we're going to be talking at 7 PM. Might have to be a little bit more direct if you're, depending on the degree of concern. But if it's something that you have some question about, I think approaching it and just letting them know like, hey, I see you. Like I see that. I'm a safe person to talk to about it.
Can we repeat the rubric again? I'm obsessed. I
see, I fear, and I hope.
Okay. Everyone, I think I'm like, okay, I wrote that down in my head. I'm literally going to go back and review it. Because I feel like that's really just like a really beautiful, kind, open-hearted way to talk about anything. Yeah. Especially something that is just so layered and complex and highly sensitive as this. Yeah. I love that.
And I feel like it inherently has that humility that I hope that we all have, just in that, that one can hopefully decrease somebody's defensiveness if they're feeling, protective of themselves in that moment. But also acknowledges like, I don't necessarily, like, I can tell you what I see, but I don't know for sure what that is or where that's coming from. So, I mean, it's a good one, even like with our partners, like, I see that you didn't unload the dishwasher. Yeah. I fear you forgot. I hope you do it.
Like, everyone's like scribbling down their papers right now.
It's like, a little gentle.
You're like, wait, that's weird. That's my next tattoo. Just my script right here on my arm. Right. Oh my God. I love that so much. If you're building your dream business and you know you need to build an email list, but the idea of picking and using an email platform totally overwhelms you, trust me, I get it. But I've got you, girl. Flowdesk is where it's at. Flowdesk is the email marketing platform designed with female entrepreneurs in mind. Think gorgeous, on-brand templates plus powerful workflows that save you hours. I promise you, I've never used an easier email platform with such stunning results. Whether you're sending an email launching a new offer or podcast episode, sharing new news, or trying out a fancy workflow to convert a new email subscriber into a paying customer, Flowdesk helps you show up professionally with ease without spending a ton of time or money. And not to mention, these emails are gorgeous. And because you're a Write Your Own Story podcast listener, you get an exclusive 50% off your first year of Flowdesk. Plus, they'll send you $19 cash back when you join using the link in the show notes. So if you're ready to send stunning emails that convert and actually enjoy the process, click the link in the show notes and give Flowdesk a try. That's 50% off your first year plus $19 back in your pocket. Check out Flowdesk today. It's like your super talented email writing best friend. I promise you won't regret it. Now, back to the episode. Okay, so you also brought up a really important point that I want to make sure that we give a little bit of focus on, and then really, truly, I promise I will let you go. Two last points. One is when those of us with sons and daughters, because you said it's not just specific to girls. Sure. What are our watch outs for,
like particularly with our children?
Yeah,
kiddos. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I would say to parents kind of broadly is that, I mean, any significant, I'm going to even delete the word significant, but any weight loss in a child is a red flag. And I think that too often we say, well, they're playing a lot of sports this fall, or in that case, then we hope that their nutrition is adjusting for that.
Yes.
And so we never want to see unintentional weight loss, or unexpected weight loss in kids. That said, I think sometimes the focus on the weight component can actually like distract us from a lot of these other sort of warning signs. But
yes,
so, which I would say include things like, any kind of, just sort of like heightened anxiety or apprehension about not just even like eating certain foods, though certainly that, but like eating with certain people or in certain contexts, or like avoiding like a restaurant that I used to like, and I don't really like that anymore. Like, again, those aren't pointing to, oh, my child has an eating disorder necessarily, but they're just sort of data points that we're starting to notice. But even more broadly than like the eating related things themselves, I think, the things we think of from a mental health perspective are, starting to feel more isolative,
yes,
starting to sound like they're more self-critical. And again, like some of those things, there's a spectrum, of course, and developmentally we're expecting, adolescents in particular and teenagers are going to be spending more time away from us. Like, maybe that's not being isolative, but certainly if they're spending like more time alone, alone
versus in their room on their phone on FaceTime playing games versus
right.
Okay. That's a good distinction.
Then those things, might raise more of a concern, but, and might just invite more conversation or connecting potentially with a therapist or, other resources that might be helpful.
Absolutely.
Even if there's not a problem. I mean, I think, engaging in therapy at the risk of sounding like, I think in our culture today, there's this idea of like, everybody should be in therapy. And I don't necessarily think that's the case.
Yeah.
I don't think it will hurt everybody.
Right. I was like, I kind of actually do. I'm just going to go out on my limb and be like, actually.
Yeah. Well, great.
if that's my vote.
You can say it. Yeah. But I think that like for a teenager, for example, being able to have a non-parent, safe adult, wise adult who, you're able to learn how to be more introspective, to manage emotional experiences, to, just deal with the hard parts of being human. Like,
what a gift.
How is that?
What a gift.
How can that hurt?
Truly. So that you teed up my last question absolutely perfectly.
Oh,
it's like we planned it. What does help look like when you're like, so someone who's listening who's like, oof, I feel like maybe this is feeling a little me-ish, or maybe this is feeling my teenager-ish, or like how, so, cause sometimes I feel like fixing it feels so daunting. What does help look like?
Yeah. I do think it can feel really daunting. And I was going to say like let's break it down into steps. And the first step would be just like connecting with a professional. But I want to acknowledge actually that even that can involve a lot of steps and feel really daunting in and of itself for a lot of people.
It's like getting on the schedule and who's the right one and are we the right fit?
Yeah. And so many people end up calling, lots of places before they get a call back. And, we have a mental health shortage and all of that. So I certainly don't mean to imply that that's like an easy step.
No,
but I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I might even leave it there because I think then like, then the path kind of diverges. But I think on the, in terms of like what treatment might look like, but I think just in terms of like small things that we might be able to do in our own relationship with ourselves and food and our own emotions and those kinds of things. I mean, I think a lot about eating disorders at their root being kind of the absence of a relationship of trust between myself and my body. Ooh. And so if there are things that we can do, even totally separate from food related things that are just about learning to trust my body and my body to trust me. I bring this one up often because it's been so significant to me, but it sounds a little weird, but something like I started doing just in my own life where I realized was like a way I could build more body trust is like stopping what I'm doing to go pee and use the bathroom versus like always holding it and being like, body, you can wait until I'm done with this. And just like little things like that, I think are what sort of start to build this like trusting interactive relationship between my body and myself where like
obsessed.
Something's
a little more positive. Like, no, we're disconnected. We're actually completely connected.
Right. Yeah. Or going to, sleep, is a huge one of like, can my body rely on me to do the things that I need to do to actually get like real rest? Is all part of like reestablishing that trust that sometimes it's because of an eating disorder, but it can be for lots of other reasons. We've, lost sort of trust with our bodies too.
And to I think about this a lot. Like I joked for a long time, and I'm still, I dabble, but I really went through a rest era where like I just needed so much rest for like years. Like, I mean, not really, but like for a really long time, coming out of a really stressful situation. I was like, and I felt like coming out of my divorce, I felt like I just ran on adrenaline for years, for like 2 years. And then I was like, I'm in my rest era now that I'm, coming back down. Yeah. And like, but I feel like women disconnect from our bodies in that way, where rest is seen as weak or lazy, or there's no time for it. And it's like, similar to like you were saying with peeing or sleeping, it's like I can connect with what I need and give it what it needs in the moment, or at least relatively close.
Right. Stop pretending that we're just sort of like occupying these machines.
Totally. Right. This machine is highly sensitive.
Even machines need maintenance.
Yes.
But now that I say that. So.
Yeah. Okay. This paints such a clear picture of that, like help is very accessible, and it both within yourself and, within the professionals that you can seek and lean on. Okay. Tell us where we can find your profession, where we can find your collaborative, and how people can get involved.
Yeah. On social media, the best place would be on Instagram, and it's at Galia Collaborative. And all of our stuff is there. And then our website is just galiacollaborative.com, but that's a good place to learn about the providers that we have in our practice and kind of specialties and all of that. Yeah, because it is well beyond eating disorders, as we mentioned at the top of the show. But truly, I think anyone out there who, wherever you fit on the spectrum of all things in life, right? It's all a relative spectrum, but, know that you are not alone, and that you are so seen, and that, your feelings are valid and your struggles are real, but there is help everywhere, both inside and around and in your community. But this was I really appreciate you taking this time. Yeah. This was it really opened a lot of my mind to things that I just didn't even know. And it helps me be, I think, more compassionate to myself as I navigate life, and to others. So I really appreciate this. Thank you. You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolute treat. Okay, you guys, I know this episode certainly hit home with so many of you, and share it to anyone else who you think might just, kind of get that warm feeling to be like, oh, there it is. I feel seen, or I can do something about this. But please share, because that is what we're here to do, here to help. All right, you guys, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Well, that's the end of this episode, but promise me, you won't stop here with whatever it is you're feeling or dreaming about. I hope you leave today feeling empowered to live life just as you see fit. If this podcast was helpful to you, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. I genuinely just want to help women live the life they dream about. So if this type of content tracks with you, subscribe to this podcast or visit our website, writeyourownsstory.co, to download digital courses or to grab a journal and a mug to just dream in and dream with. It's your life, lady. Do you. And just remember, I'm rooting for you, and you've totally got this.